Daven, the business case for clean water goes beyond compliance and sustainability. It's really about creating long-term value for communities and clients, of course, of the organizations we serve. And from your perspective, how can AEC leaders better communicate and demonstrate that value both internally, but also to the broader public, which we have to do?
A lot of this is, making the case for clean water investment is all about, communications, working with the regulators and policymakers and private investors, to make that case. A lot of this has to be, worked with local boards and the community. And so the community wants clean drinking.
If you want to be a strong leader in the AEC industry, you're going to need to do a few things well. Number one, you're going to need to build high-performing teams. To do that, you're going to need to build relationships with those on your teams. And the other thing that you're going to have to be able to do well is adapt to change, because let's face it, change happens every single day. Well, in today's episode, I'm joined by Daven Oswalt, Water Business Group Director at GFT, where he leads a global team of 850 professionals delivering resilient, technically advanced water solutions. With more than 3 decades of experience spanning North America, Latin America, Europe, and Asia, Daven has guided some of the industry's most complex water and infrastructure programs. And today he's going to talk about leadership, building teams, communicating effectively, building relationships within a team, adapting to change. And he's even going to touch on program management and what a great career pathway it can be. I'm your host, Anthony Fasano, and this is the AEC Leadership Podcast. So before we dive in with Daven, here's a quick word from our sponsor for today's episode, GFT. All right, now I'd like to welcome my guest onto the show for today. Daven Oswalt is the Water Business Group Director at GFT, and we're excited to have him. So, Daven, I welcome you to the AEC Leadership Podcast.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So, Daven, maybe you can start off by telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got started in the water industry and how that kind of led you to your role today as Water Business Group Director at GFT.
That sounds good, Anthony. So my path's a little bit different than most professionals in the engineering space. I started off in government affairs, was a political science major out of college. The day I graduated from Colorado Mesa University in Colorado, I got in my car at the time, a Plymouth Champ, drove across country, parked at the Capitol, ran up the steps when you could run up the steps at the Capitol.
Right.
Started my career. So I worked for the U.S. Senate. I was in the House. I was in the White House under George Bush Sr. Then I went to California and I worked in the state assembly, worked in the state Senate, worked for Governor Pete Wilson at the time as well in the governor's office. And then I came in, worked for Intel Corporation. So then I started coming into the more of the private sector, and then went to MWH, where I started in government affairs. Sure. I came into this industry in government affairs, and then worked for MWH, Parsons, and Pasadena, California, and then AECOM, and then in 2023 joined GFT as our Water Business Group leader. So a little different path than most.
Okay, interesting. No, it definitely sounds like a very interesting kind of background and pathway. And Daven, the business case for clean water goes beyond compliance and sustainability. It's really about creating long-term value for communities and clients, of course, of the organizations we serve. And from your perspective, how can AEC leaders better communicate and demonstrate that value both internally, but also to the broader public, which we have to do?
Right. So there's a lot of uncertainty as well in the marketplace right now. And that was, I was on a panel a few months ago with NACLA. And one of the things that we were addressing was, just the new normal. So the new normal is very different than in the past. So a lot of this is, making the case for clean water investment is all about, communications and working with the regulators and policymakers and private investors, to make that case. So there's a lot of shifting of the conversation. And so on one hand, clean water safeguards, public health, but it's also economic productivity. And so a lot of this has to be, worked with political boards and the community. And so the community wants clean drinking water. They want infrastructure that works. Currently live down in San Diego. Lake Hodges is right behind me, about 5 miles, and that is a dam that's in very, very poor shape. The city is trying to, of course, repair that dam, replace that dam, and budget slows it down. And so right now that's on hold, but it's one of the most dams at risk in the U.S. and in the country, and needs to be repaired. So the city's doing their best to articulate that to the community, and that's what kind of a case study on what we need to do to keep making that point, because there's always a cost benefit. And so, working with the community, working with the leaders, working with the engineering community, to make sure that that the folks know what's happening and come together to fix these issues.
Strong project outcomes need skilled managers and competent leaders. EMI's corporate training delivers expert-led courses in project management and people leadership, plus industry-recognized certification and exclusive premium content to take your team even further. Elevate your team's leadership capabilities today. Visit engineeringmanagementinstitute.org and click on corporate training. Yeah, and I think that's the challenge, because I think most organizations will recognize the importance of water resilience, of course, but it's that struggle to try to prioritize investments, right? When you have the technical experts, of course, that you work with that can get it done, but then you have, the other other things at play. Like you said, there are boards, there's the local community, right? There's the business community. And it's kind of aligning all of those efforts into one. And honestly, for someone who's a technical professional like myself, or those out there working on these projects, right? It's not that easy to communicate those things to all these different parties.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and the issues are not going away from how we connect with the public with PFAS and the lead and copper rule. I mean, all of those, are extremely, extremely important. There was a time, and I'll go back 4 or 5 years, where there were agencies that didn't want to talk about PFAS, because if you talk about it and you identify it, then you have to fix the problem. That has changed, and I think that's changed a lot from leadership in the public utilities and leadership at some of the state and local areas. And now I think we have a good challenge on our hands to go out with PFAS and lead and copper, and to help solve these problems and to fix it, and your community buy-in on public health. 20, 30 years ago, I worked for the California Environmental Protection Agency, was part of my position when I worked for Governor Wilson. And, we were addressing lots of environmental issues and contaminations in the water system. And so the success there was, once you got to the public, that you had an agency and you had public officials that wanted to fix the problem. And that usually helped move it forward to get folks on board, the state legislatures, etc. And so that communication, you'll hear me say that a few times in this chat today, is extremely important. The communication, internal and external.
Yeah, so let's, along these same lines as we keep progressing here, I want to talk a little bit about the rise of program management, which has been a big deal in the AEC industry, because now we're dealing with much more complex infrastructure programs, multiple programs that organizations deal with. So talk a little bit about how more prevalent program management, larger projects, has kind of reshaped the way that AEC leaders really need to plan and deliver and manage these complex programs.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been involved in many program management offers across the country. And so mostly on, 100% on the water side. And so I worked with the San Francisco Public Utilities on their wastewater program. where they were trying to get out ahead of consent decree language from EPA and put in that investment to start making, to start making these improvements in their infrastructure, which they've done, a fantastic job. Program management is key because you can bring together, teams and improve your efficiency, value, and results, and a lot of collaborative delivery. You get a lot of programs, and we sit on several of these across the country, that you don't know the difference from the consultant to the client. And that's the way it needs to be, because you have a goal of delivering a consent decree, delivering a project. And so having that, seamless, collaboration is extremely, extremely important. There are some big programs across the country. Focus on the water side with BC Water's, programs at Blue Plains, which is the largest wastewater treatment plant, advanced wastewater treatment plant in the world. Program management team that works hand in hand with the client and solving the problems and getting these projects done. One of the first ones that folks have kind of don't talk about anymore, but we're 20 years ago, Southern Nevada Water Authority was one of the first programs that were bringing in, and I'm not, 50 to 60 consultants into their program to address, some, critical needs of water supply. And that was quite the amazing, amazing program. And it really set the stage because there was a lot of other agencies that were watching this and seeing how successful it was. And, it's a very good program, very good example of how these programs collaborate, work together, and a lot of community outreach. Community outreach is key in these programs. San Francisco had a campaign, your number two is our number one. And so that you could reach out to, all different folks with a little sense of humor. That was the whole point, to let folks know that the system needed to be upgraded, and the pros and cons of a system that's just needed investment. And so, those are the type of things that programs need to do and do to be successful. But, program management is definitely a way to get things done.
Yeah. And one thing I'll say for those of you listening that aren't too familiar with program management, I know a lot of you are familiar with project management. Project management, of course, taking a project, overseeing it from kind of A to Z, from initiation all the way through execution and closeout. Program management is really where you're managing a portfolio of projects, right? Where the projects have to intertwine with each other, or one might affect the other. So you really have to look at from a larger, bigger picture view of everything going on. Like Daven's example with Nevada, maybe they had a bunch of different projects going on within their program or their water portfolio, if you will. So when we're talking about a portfolio of projects or program management, Daven, from your experience, what helps someone to be a strong program leader when it comes to all the different facets of things that they have to manage in a program?
Yeah, a program manager is definitely needs strong leadership skills, communication skills. Also has to be able to collaborate with not only the client but his own team. And a lot of these you have contractors in place. You have subs. Some of these teams are huge with lots of components. So the successful program managers that I've worked with, they have a good communication skills. They're a collaborator. Their outreach is very strong, and they know it's needed because they have to bring folks together to get to a certain point. And so, that's what I really noticed. I had a client a few years ago come to me and they were coming out with a program. It's actually the Hampton Road Sanitation District in Virginia Beach. It's over $1 billion program, huge program. And he said, I need a program manager with an S on their chest. And that's what we're looking at. You really need folks that can get things done and know how to get the big things done. There was a book a few years ago by some strong engineers, and they talked about different projects and different programs that either failed or succeeded. And the one nugget that I got out of that out of that read was there's a lot of collaboration, but it's communication. So you have a big communication group that you have to reach out to, and that's usually the success, and a lot of planning, and you hit the big things early that need to be hit, and make and get some quick wins to bring that team together. So that's usually the folks that I've seen that have been successful are extremely good communicators and collaborators.
Yeah, that's great. I think the one thing to consider if you're either in program management and developing or interested in taking that on is, to David's point, you got to have strong communication skills, but you have to communicate with a lot of different types of professionals and the public, right? Potentially on your
Correct.
projects, right? So, yes, you've got to be able to talk about some of the technical topics on your project, but then you might have to go to a meeting and present it to the community. Then you might have to go for funding presentation. So, really, when you say an S on your chest, you really need to be able to juggle a lot of different stakeholders on the projects, which I think is why it's really hard to find and develop good program leaders because it's difficult thing to do. Managing a project is one thing, but managing a program with a lot of different projects and a lot of different stakeholders is just another level. So it can be really good and challenging kind of career path for AEC leaders, but make no mistake about it, you're going to have to interact with a lot of different people.
That's correct. And on the water side, there's folks that have been doing this for a while that are starting to retire. So one thing that we always work, and I'm sure you do as well, Anthony, with in your group is bringing out that next group of leaders. So we're always trying to bring folks into these programs so they can see how these big programs work, and learn from folks that have been through the ups and downs in programs. One night you're in front of council, the next night you're the next day you're in a board meeting with the client. And so there's a lot of work to do to be a successful program manager, but a very, engaging, rewarding career.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's a really good point. The whole idea of succession planning. And if you are a program manager and you're looking to develop others in your organization, you got to get some of those really exceptional project managers to start, spending
Right.
some time with you and then coming to some of the meetings like David suggests. And then on the flip side, if you're a PM and you've excelled and you're thinking about program management, talk to a program manager in your company. Can I attend a couple meetings? Can I learn about program management? Because that could be a great next step for you. And I think the more eyes on, real situations that you can get, seeing things. I mean, that's how I learned, right? Going to these meetings and observing people. That's your best first step before you kind of get thrown into the mix because, it is like getting thrown into the fire when you do program management. So any preparation you can have is very positive. So, David, I want to ask you a little bit about high performing teams. I think something that we need to develop in the AEC industry as leaders, whether you're doing program management, you're leading a department, you're leading an organization, it's essential for us to build high performing teams. So, you've been around a lot of teams, you've been in different organizations. What can you share with what you've seen in taking technical talent and developing into, high productive teams?
You know, I always say that retention for folks in the engineering firm starts on day one. It's not, when in this industry right now, there are lots of opportunities for folks to move around and to get other opportunities. But you want your team to be happy, satisfied with the work they're doing. And so I focus on mentorship and, mission alignment, and really working with our teams to embrace the talent and see a clear path forward. And that starts from the entry levels, to mid-career, to folks that are, towards the end of their career. And I find these folks that might be towards the end of their career wanting to give back to the folks that are coming up. And so, fostering that, technical talent with, collaboration and accountability. I mean, that's just extremely important. So, everything, is investing in that technical team. So you grow the team and be, very clear with, expectations and checking in with the team. But that's how, I've seen, and as you mentioned, I've been doing this for a while. And the success that I see is when you have leaders within your organization that really reach out, was mentorship and to, getting the team across the line together. And so that would be some of my, thoughts on how we approach that. And the other thing that's a little different in the engineering world is we go through all these steps to get to a certain level, and you'll see other industries where, folks that might be a little younger can jump into a position faster. And so what I've been trying to do here and everywhere else I've been is bringing folks people, if someone's ready for a major position, then let's give them that major position. And we can, help them along the way just like we would anyone else, but we can't just be closed-minded that you've got to be 50 to be an engineer 5 or whatever
Right,
it might
right.
be. And so that's a lot of collaboration. That's a lot of helping, push people into leadership roles, and it helps them, be successful. And I've seen a lot of folks do incredible, when they're pushed to lead like that. So that would be some of my thoughts on developing that team and fostering, this group.
Yeah, and I thought what you said, David, about the expectations is so important. I think setting really clear expectations for your team members and holding them accountable for those expectations is, I think, something that I see a lot of AEC leaders don't do very well. And it can come back to really bite you as a leader, because if you can't set those expectations for your team, you're not giving them that clarity, right? Like that light at the end of the tunnel of what they're striving towards, which can prevent you. So I think that's something to be aware of for those of you out there developing and trying to grow teams and doing some of the things that David talked about is, set those expectations up front, let your team know what you're expecting from them, and then help them to get there. But at least you're giving them kind of, like I've heard it referred to as, you're giving them like the box top. If you're doing a puzzle, you got to see the box top so you know what you're kind of putting together. You got to kind of set that vision, so to speak.
Yeah.
That's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I heard an example the other day. Folks said, well, how do you deal with change? And the person say, well, if the change is negative, I need to talk to folks about that. And so it goes right back to the communication side of this, that we need to over communicate. We need to get in front of these issues and talk to our teams and lead. And sometimes there's folks that should not be a manager. And as leaders in the industry, we have to work with that. They can be an incredible technical resource, but they might not be the best people manager. And so we need to fix those issues. And especially, in our industry and in other industries, people leave different positions normally because of their supervisor. And so, so that's extremely important and it goes back to this, having a team approach where the supervisor is on the same page and knows how to lead these folks and mentor these folks.
Yeah, I like that a lot, because I think that that's one of the things that we're challenged with in our industry is the, new technology, the climate demands, funding models, right? It's constant change. And like you're
Yep.
saying, the way that you deal with that change is you have to talk to people, right? You have to be able to connect with people. And when something happens, you can't, just kind of, sweep it under the rug. You've got to talk to your team about it head on and say, we have an issue that's coming and we need to resolve it. And I think that that's so important in our industry because of all the different changes that are happening. If you're a leader who's going to kind of hide from those things, it's going to be very difficult for you to lead in the AEC industry today, because it's just inevitable. You're showing up every day with change.
That's right, Anthony. And also with our flexible workplace now, with a lot of folks being remote, there's not that, we lost a lot of that during COVID, as you know, but we lost that ability to see these folks in person, for folks to learn in the lunchroom about, what Stan's working on. I mean, a lot of those opportunities, are not the same. And, some of the, in the industry are in 2 to 3 days a week. Some are full, but there's a lot of different variations in this, and a lot more remote than of course in the past. During COVID, one thing that I would do every day at noon would invite 20 to 30 people just across the organization and do just a lunch call where we were chatting, and sometimes it didn't have anything to do with work, but how these folks were doing, but building that communication, platform for folks to talk and to work together and to reach out when they have issues or questions. And so, yeah, it goes back to, building those teams and communicating as much as possible.
Yeah, I love that example. Just getting people on the line and letting them talk and, get things on the table together and see how people are doing, because I think that that's something that we're so project driven in the AC industry, deadline driven, that sometimes we forget to do some of the important things like you just talked about, Dave, and getting your team together, checking in on them, right? Building that team. And
Right.
those are the things that really help people, I think, be really good leaders in the long term, is they have a longer vision of their team and they're not just thinking of, do I have my deliverable in today? No, this is a team I got to keep and cultivate for like years to come, hopefully.
Yeah, that's right. Because you get your one project done, and you're off to the next one, and so you need to be able to take that that experience that you have and help improve the next position and next project that you're working on. It's extremely important.
So, David, in your own leadership development throughout your career, was there like a couple of experiences or an experience that stood out for you in terms of developing yourself as a leader? Was it just, continuous work over time, or what are some big takeaways from yourself in your own leadership journey?
So I've been blessed to work with some great individuals over the years, and I think that's where was able to take things that I learned from these folks and to bring it into my own career and style. I mentioned earlier, I started in government, and then I went into this industry doing government affairs, which quickly led into business development. And what I took from government affairs is political campaigns. And so when we go after projects, for example, you do everything it takes to win a project, to win a pursuit. And you look at every angle, from your geopolitical to your technical solutions to your subs that you have on the team, the folks that have relationships, to your past performance, which we can never forget. That's usually the most important thing on any future project. If you're not producing on the current job, then how are you going to produce on the next one? So, that's extremely, extremely valuable. So what I really learned from the past one experience is that these are campaigns, and you do everything you can to win a project and to produce for the client. If it works out, great. If it's not, and you have to have a short memory, then you go to the next one, and you do everything. So early on was working with folks that were these business development professionals. And that's what I really, kind of honed in on when I first started in this industry, and how to, go out and do everything it takes to win and then please the client. And so even when we would win a project, I never went away from it. I would always was, back either on the JV boards or going to seeing the client, seeing how things were going. And so that, that was something that I always did. And again, I learned that from folks that I started with in the industry.
That's great. I mean, I think that that's a huge part of leadership, is learning from others along your journey and, learning something from them, applying it. Maybe some of it's going to work for you, maybe some of it's not, but you're kind of collecting all these different lessons from different mentors and people you've worked with, which can help you to be a better leader in the future. So, David, what's one final piece of advice that you could share with AEC leaders who are striving to deliver, meaningful impact through their projects and their people in today's climate?
So kind of how I started off. There's a lot of uncertainties in the marketplace, currently right now, and with federal funding and the government shutdown, there's a lot of folks that are very, very uncertain. So one thing that I would say on that end is to keep close to your teams, keep that communication open, also with your clients. I mean, the engineering's a people business. We're not selling sunglasses here.
Right.
We're all about selling technical solutions that are, very efficient and work for the client. Sometimes the client can afford this project. Sometimes they need, this, something a little less. And so you really got to, continue to, to work with your clients, work with your teams, and to make that successful. And I always, say to folks, you gotta lead with a purpose and bring everybody along with you as you go. I mean, it's not, it's not one person doing this, but it's, you're not going to get there, by yourself. And you got to put yourself into other people's shoes. I do listen to a lot of Simon podcasts, and
Mm.
it's all about being empathetic and bringing folks together. and people have a different experience if that's not the leadership and that's not the culture that they're around. It can be very negative if it's not if folks are not looking out after you. So I don't know if that helps answer that question, but that's
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I mean, in fact, I think something that you said there is important, which goes back to what you said earlier, which was when you, like you said, when times are tough, things happen, a shutdown, that's when you got to stay tight with your team.
yep,
And I think what you talked about earlier, like doing some of those luncheon get-togethers and stuff like that, right? You're building up those relationships so that when you do hit a rough patch or go through a tough time, you have that relationship. Because if you didn't have that, it would be much more difficult to get through a time that's tough, right? That's like that long-term view.
yeah. Yeah, when you don't know someone or you don't really know the client, you don't know what they're going through, you don't know how their commute was that day. Yeah, it's gonna just be a different situation. So the more that we can communicate, the more we can talk to our teams and our client and our colleagues in the industry. I mean, we're not enemies here. I mean, we work together a lot. Sometimes we're going up against each other, but at the end of the day, we're all trying to deliver, sound infrastructure, for our community. So the more we work together, the more we talk and communicate. And I will say, we see a lot of our folks at these major conferences. We were just at WEFTech in Chicago, where we we meet with colleagues. We're on the same panels, etc. Lots of technical papers, and so the community is pretty pretty tight, I would say, and everybody knows each other. I always tell folks, you need to work well with each other because some days they could be your next colleague or your boss or your
Yeah.
client, and so there's really no room here for enemies. It's because that's not what we're here for. We're here to deliver for the community and for for our friends and families, basically. So it's pretty close to home type of stuff we're doing here.
Absolutely. All right. Well, once again, he is Daven Oswalt, Water Business Group Director at GFT. David, I want to thank you so much for your time today here on the AEC Leadership Podcast. You gave us some great advice. We really appreciate some of your time.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Have a good day.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Daven. He is a recognized global leader leading one of the largest engineering organizations in this world. And he really gave us some great advice, right? Little tips from his leadership journey, but things that can really have a ripple effect if you can build relationships with your team, if you can build a high-performing team, if you're able to adapt to change on a regular basis. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you did, please subscribe to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help technical professionals become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.